Thank you.
Thank you, James. Michael, could you pass those magical superpowers over to Laura?
I yield to the honorable gentlewoman from the wilderness back there.
I want the opportunity to be chair. Oh, there we are. Well, before I say anything, I would like to turn the floor over to the marvelous Tony Turner, our building committee chair, who is a fantastic public servant. We always give their bio, right? He's got a long bio, but I will say he has been a distinguished member of the Board of Estimate and Taxation. So he knows the shoes in which the financial board sits, and also serving on the Energy Management Advisory Committee, as well as our building committee. So I'm going to turn it over to him, and we do have some architects ready to present as well.
I think I have to say thank you, Madam Chairman. I was prepared to say Mr. Chairman, but now that you're chairing the committee, it's Madam Chairman. If we could have Amy Samuelson unmuted, she's part of the architectural team, and she's going to be presenting just a few slides with a view of giving everyone on the board and Dr. Jones an update on our project. As you all know, we have been meeting in the building committee since July of last year. We've made a tremendous amount of progress in a variety of areas. Sometimes we meet once a week, sometimes we meet 4 times a week, just depending on what we need to get done. So with that, I want to be sure to thank my fellow committee members for all their work. We have an upcoming evening meeting, and it just continues to go on, and we're trying to get a lot of things done within a certain amount of time because the clock is running, as someone has already alluded to earlier. So if Amy could put up the first slide, what we're going to do is just recap for you. And I'm going to hold for 30 seconds. Well, here we go. What we're going to do is recap for you the Community Engagement Forum slide program that we presented to the community last Wednesday, I think it was, and just give you a sample of some of the slides and some of the work that we've done up to this point. If we can go to the next slide, as you probably know, we've hired 3 organizations to help us in this effort. The Construction Solutions Group, which is our owner's rep. The SLAM Collaborative is our architect, better known as SLAM. And Turner Construction, no relation, as our construction manager. CSG has been in place since October of last year. SLAM was hired as our architect only 10 weeks ago now, 9 weeks ago, sorry. And Turner Construction has been on the job now as the construction manager only for 2 weeks. And if we could go to the next slide, and then I'm going to turn it over to Amy to give you some examples of the work that's been done by SLAM and where we are right now. One of the things I want to be very sure to point out to the committee is our timeline. And if I could go to the middle of the slide, you can see that construction is slated to begin in the summer of next year. Excuse me, with approximately 20 to 21 months of construction, which will bring us to February of 26. And you can see in the spring of 26, the intent is to have the building completed with move-in. So we will be fully set to go again in the fall of 26 with a view of doing demolition for the current building over the summer and into early fall. Again, not to spend more time on the slide, but you can get a sense as to the timeline with the highlight around construction. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Amy Samuelson. Amy is the project director on behalf of SLAM for the project. She has, I think, 4 slides to show you, to bring you up to date with the idea, at least currently, of where the building is being envisioned on the property, and what we have in mind from a traffic management standpoint. And then after that, we'll of course take any questions. So Amy, it's all yours.
You might be muted.
You might be muted.
Tony, this is Cap. I think her phone needs to be unmuted. because
Okay.
she's calling in through her phone.
She's a panelist, but she has to get in using her phone. Is there?
What are
is-
the last 3 digits of her number?
8936 are the last 4.
Thank you. Sorry for that confusion, everyone. Thank you, Tony. Slam Collaborative is proud to be working on this important project for the town of Greenwich. We've been looking very closely at the site parameters so far, early in the design phases. Primarily, that's what we've been working on, in addition to the verification of the ed spec, which is an ongoing process. In terms of the site, we are, if someone can advance, please. We are looking at all of the neighborhoods in the surrounding area and all of the potential and existing locations to bring traffic in and out of the site. So that was a quick overview. This slide is showing our traffic study, which was approved Tuesday at the latest building committee meeting. We are anticipating that that traffic study will take place between March 27th and April 6th. The subcommittee for communications for Central Middle School will be sending out detailed information about that after their meeting, I believe tomorrow. So the traffic study, though, will take place looking at all of the circled intersections that you see here, which are the 2 existing curb cuts for the existing school, and the intersections at both ends of Indian Rock Lane. We will also be looking at the intersection of Orchard Street and Stanwich Road, at Orchard Street and Coach Lamp Lane, at Orchard Street and Sinaway, and also at Stanwich Road and Fairfield Road. Realizing that this site, and in particular Indian Rock Lane, where the entrance and exits are today, are highly impacted not only by CMS traffic, but by traffic for the high school and for some of the private schools nearby. We're timing the traffic study to make sure that all of those schools are in session during those traffic counts. There will also be 3, I believe, traffic counters across the road. Those will be in place for 48 hours during that same time frame. So those will be at Indian Rock Lane, at Stanwich, 900 feet north of Indian Rock, and at Orchard, just south of Coach Lamp. So we'll be taking a look at all of the information and data that comes from that traffic study as we move forward with the site plans. We also have been studying those site plans for a potential location of the new building. Next slide, please. We have a couple of different options on the boards with more to come. Certainly these options will be changing based on the traffic study analysis, or I should say will be supplemented by that traffic study. The building footprint that you see represented on this site plan is one potential option of many It is just to show a scale and location. We are looking at putting the school on the existing fields, tucked close to the hillside and potentially even built into the hill to take advantage of some of that slope and allow for the majority of the site, which is very flat, to be the location for the fields. So really trying to maximize the opportunities for fields and for parking as we tuck the building in under the hill. So you can see in this option, we would be utilizing one of the existing curb cuts that enters the lower parking lot of the existing Central Middle School. The intention of the very long driveway that you see from that entrance point up through to the new 2 separate parking areas is really to give a long length for queuing for that parent drop-off that we know right now takes place by queuing right along Indian Rock Lane and then even turning up Orchard. So we want to get rid of all of that traffic on the road and make sure that all parents are we're providing enough space for parents to queue on the site instead. So that's the intention for the long driveway. And you'll see that then at midpoint, the driveway splits, in this case, to the left, the bus loop, and to the right, the parent drop-off and some additional parking in both of those areas. Both would drop students off along the center spine that is pedestrian only, and all students would have the same entrance point to the school. In this case, it's at the knuckle between the 2 wings, the L shape, and it would be centrally located in any building scheme that we come up with. We have a very minor entrance off of Stanwich, which we are showing now as service and emergency personnel only. And that would serve the kitchen cafeteria and also allow fire and emergency vehicles to come up and around to the back of the school in order to be within the required 150-foot length of any point from the building for their hoses. Next site plan is a very similar, thank you, is a very similar plan at this time, but it is showing an additional separate access point, this time along Orchard Street, where we would be recommending bus entrance only with a gated entrance. And that gated entrance would be controlled with electronics and automatic readers, like barcode readers on the buses that would open and close the gates. And some access would be given as well to faculty for parking since they arrive before the buses. But in this case, the bus loop would come around and drop off along that same pedestrian spine that I described earlier, and parent vehicles would continue to come off of Indian Rock Lane, utilizing that long driveway, again, for queuing of parents' cars and to make sure that we're keeping all of that queuing off of the streets. You can see that in both of these options, we're trying to maximize the distance between the existing building, which is dashed in here, and any potential new building. We'll work very closely with the CM to make sure that there's a safe definition between the existing school in session during construction to make sure that there's a separation that is clear and distinct. And we feel that the addition of that driveway cut along Orchard would also allow for a safe passage of construction vehicles coming in and out separate from the location of the 2 existing parking lot entrances for CMS. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to take those. I believe that's the end of the slideshow.
Okay, let's go to the next slide and look at next steps. I want to be sure that the board is fully aware of next steps. React to the traffic study, as Amy mentioned earlier, the traffic study has now been planned. And the option 1 and option 2 driveway plans that you just saw will be heavily influenced and driven by the outcome of the traffic study. So again, we're approximately 2 weeks away from commencing that study. Developing building plan options and exterior character and building elevations. The design review committee has met now 3 times. Our next meeting is March 22nd. And we continue to meet every 2 weeks, noting that these 2 items will be front and center for the design review committee next week for March 22nd. Again, developing building plan options and exterior character. We will not finish these 2 items next Wednesday, but we will begin to make a lot of headway with a view to moving to a project plan estimate, which is the last item, construction cost estimate. We are keenly aware that we need to produce a project cost estimate as soon as possible. It looks as though we're roughly 30 days away from being able to do that. When we've coordinated with or are coordinating with the BET and letting them know of that timeline. At the same time, the RTM moderator is keenly aware of that timeline. So we're doing everything we can to go as quickly as possible. But we're also working under the principle that we'd rather be right and late than on time and not right. So that's a very key driving principle for what we're working on right now. So, Madam Chairman, we'll entertain any questions and do our best to answer them. You liked that, didn't you?
I loved it. I don't have any questions because I'm there all the time. Ms. Kowalski.
Thanks, Laura. With respect to the timeline, does this include putting back the fields? Because what would that be? That seems to be a bullet point that would come after the demolition of the existing building and site work completion. Does that mean site work completion, meaning adding the fields, or would that come after?
It would come after.
Okay. And is there any concerns with respect to putting the building on the now current fields and putting the fields here? Just because when you take a look at it, the lay of the land is obviously not flat already. So is there any concern regarding how we're going to flatten this out for field purposes?
Amy or Kemp, you guys want to try that one? That sounds like more of a landscape architect question.
It does, but I think I can give a brief response. We are placing the building into the most dramatic portion of the hillside and allowing for the use of the flat area for fields. Again, once the building comes down, we'll be assessing that area, but we anticipate that there's going to have to be some leveling of the existing field area where we're showing parking lots now and fields. Right now, that existing field gets a little wet. It doesn't drain properly. So we'll be looking to lift that and provide the right drainage underneath anyway. And that will probably allow for the remaining section of the new fields to be raised to about the same level.
Yeah, I'm not sure that addressed the question that I have, but I think what you're saying is that assessing and putting in the fields is an after project to the 2026 timeframe or September 2026. And it's unclear as to the timing of when the fields would be completed because we'd have to assess the land that those fields would currently go on, which is where this building is sitting.
Sorry, the fields would be designed during the same timeline as the project. We will have the information that we need to design the fields appropriately. And yes, they will be installed immediately after the demolition of the existing building. But luckily, the way that the timeline is working, that will be during the fall season, and that is an appropriate time for planting planting athletic fields.
Unless you're doing turf, then it really doesn't matter when you do it. Right. Anyway,
Correct.
other question, I think this goes more towards you, Tony. We got an email earlier this week, I believe that's when it was sent, regarding things that were being proposed to adding into the ed specs and other aspects of the ed specs that the board needed to consider. For one of those was a vestibule, which wasn't included apparently in our original ed specs as to how that would work. But then there were additional adds that SLAM was suggesting to add to the ed specs. How is that going to be addressed in the timeline for the overall approval of the project?
I would answer that in a couple of ways. One, we have the view in the building committee that we are strictly to build the building according to the ed specs and the requirements from the Board of Education. And we are currently working under the ed specs from August 22nd of last year. The architectural firm was asked to look at a couple of different variations that was directed by either members of the board or the GPS administration as just additional information. So we do not anticipate deviating from the ed specs. Now, if the board changes the ed specs, we'll change accordingly, but our mandate is to follow the ed specs.
So in the current drafting in the process, the things that they were proposing and adding, we've told them, don't add them.
Correct.
And then with respect to the square footage on the entry and vestibule, when will proposals come to the board as to how to address those issues?
Good. We are beginning a process Monday evening of reviewing what we're calling some ideas from SLAM as to their best thinking based on experiences in being the architect for K through 12 schools in the state of Connecticut. Your example is a perfect one. One of the things they recognize is that the current set of ed specs doesn't have a lobby, and they're proposing a lobby of 800 square feet. The current ed specs also have bathrooms of 50 and I think maybe 70 square feet that are impossible to build to that size because they're not ADA compliant. So what we hope to do in the building committee is to formally come to or propose to the Board of Education as early as late next week, a specific list of things that we would like for you to consider given the rationale that I just described. And we're going to start that process on Monday. If we don't finish that on Monday, that will spill over into our regular meeting on Tuesday. But we recognize again that time is of the essence, but we do need to give you that type of feedback from the architect.
And then I just have one last question and I'll give someone else the floor. I know that there was some debate going back and forth between square footage and, doing our ed specs and what that meant for square footage purposes. And I know that there was some difference between what CSG had suggested needed to be a ratio from, I guess, the hallway space, right? Traveling corridors versus student space, except, and SLAM has one opinion, and I think CSG obviously gave us a different opinion when we approved the ed specs as to how much space needed to be added. Is there a way to resolve that difference in what how we view these ed specs to be drawn up, given the ratio between, I guess, classroom space versus traveling space within the school?
You're talking about the building efficiency ratio or the building efficiency percentage. SLAM does have a very strong opinion about that. And that's one of the topics that we're going to be looking at as a building committee on Monday as part of this review and tapping into the best thinking of SLAM. Is there any way to increase the building efficiency north of 62 to 65%? We don't know the answer to that yet because we haven't gone through the process, but we are going to do that Monday.
Okay, and I assume that CSG is a large part in that conversation since they originally suggested that we could get this done for roughly the square footage that they had
Absolutely.
suggested. Okay.
Yeah, they will be at the table. Yes, Madam Chairman.
So I just want to make the slight correction. The building committee is going to be letting the board know the results of our meetings with and consultations with the architect about some of the areas of resistance we are hitting. I will say, as far as the circulation and building core services equation that our ed specs may not have explicitly said, but I will direct everyone's attention to the August 5th memo from Dr. Jones, which does prescribe a range of building core services and combined circulation in the range of 30 to 35%. And it does have our grid with all of those factors laid out. So it was a conscious decision where our head was at that time.
Wait, can I ask a question?
Yes, Cody.
Laura, I'm not sure I fully followed that. Was the point you just made that there isn't actually a discrepancy because we've known all along that the whatever the efficiency rate or something was actually going to be different than what was in the final version of the ed specs?
No, that's not the point I'm making.
Okay, yeah, I think I misunderstood.
Karen also has her hand up online. Karen's the only Karen online. Karen?
Oh, no, well, I just didn't know if you were calling me. So I had a quick question. As I was looking at the presentation and it was at the community meeting, and I know there was just one of the main differences between site plan option 1 and site plan option 2 is having a secondary egress, which would be used, I think, for buses. I know currently Senator Middle School has 2 different parking lots with entrances, separate entrances. And so was there any thought process to how that would, if we remove one of those entrances as in site plan 1, we're doing a traffic study. I know that there's much longer driveways for a longer queue, but you'll also be having the buses in that same queue, which I think takes up a lot of the spaces for having parents because they'll be mixed in with the buses. So, was there any thought process as to how, why there's a recommendation for 1 versus 2?
Amy, you want to take that one? You seem to be our traffic
Sure.
management guru.
Sure. So I just want to be clear that neither of these are a recommendation yet until we have the traffic study and the traffic report to fully analyze all of the intersections. There are sightline issues at these roads as well that we want to take into consideration. We do feel like separating parent traffic and bus traffic is always a great idea at any school, but we'll have to wait to see what the traffic report says as to whether or not that's feasible to come off of Sandwich or Orchard. And that being said, whatever site plan we end up with, we will be doing a stacking diagram and calculating the number of cars and buses that will fit in both of those driveways. There is a longer or a greater need for a longer route for the cars. There are less buses that come, and also buses, their time is more controlled because of your scheduling. So the idea is to, even if they use the same entrance, to get the buses and cars separated into 2 separate loops. And that way the buses will be all in one loop, all fitting in that loop and not in the way of the cars that are stacked.
Perfect, thank you. I just didn't want any safety issues if we have things mixed, but I know that traffic in the area is one of our bigger concerns for our neighbors. And we want to be respectful, which is why I was asking. because I know they currently have the two different spaces. And so I guess you answered my question. Thank you.
I see Ms. Stowe and Dr. Mercanti Anthony. I'm going to call on Ms. Stowe because I saw her first.
I'm hovering over her, so it helps. First of all, I'm happy. I asked Laura off the on the side here. I'm happy to hear that they're holding off on the traffic study until the kids are back from private school. That's smart because I can tell you Stanwich is moving a lot more quickly coming to Central right now. So in fact, I got behind a bus today and still rolled in at 7:58. So so it's a big change. And that's it's not good. So that's number one. But number two, Laura, I'm happy you sort of directed us to this memo because I think it's important to remember that we spent like 8 or 9 meetings on this over the summer. I just went back through all the board minutes and we put a lot of time into these ed specs. And there was a specific, and actually Mr. Healy wrote this memo with Dr. Jones that I'm looking at here. So I know he spent a lot of time on this and that's also really important to note. And the circulatory percentage, I assume is an industry standard. It's a range. I mean, these are, this isn't the first time people are building a school. So we came up with a range, we applied a percentage, and I'm a little bit disappointed to hear that that's changing because that is seemingly moving the numbers a lot. And I don't think we should be taking away from our academic space in any way. At the same time, we need to, of course, have hallways to get the children there. I think that was very much considered in this. And so I very much look forward to that discussion on Monday night to understand why this architect seems to have different numbers. But to me, I'm a little bit skeptical, I must admit.
We will be addressing that very thoroughly.
Dr. Mercanti Anthony.
I'm kind of adding on, I guess, but beating on the point, but yeah, because there was as we all saw, there was a particularly unflattering newspaper story last week that basically, called our current ed specs unachievable, saying we didn't have room for stairs and bathrooms, mechanical closets, didn't make us sound very good at all. And obviously we spent, the newspaper article also, kept referring to the Board of Education ed specs as if it was the 8 of us in a room writing them ourselves. Obviously we hired professional consultants to draft these and based on numbers.
And we do have bathrooms and stairwells, I assure you.
I know so I am kind of at a loss as to what happened. It sounds like we have, if I'm wrong, it sounds like currently we have one set of professionals who developed the ed specs that came on and said you could build this building at a certain square footage, 115, and now we have an architectural firm saying something very different. And I guess I don't know if that is based on different formulas that they apply, or if it's based on now an examination of the site and going in more in depth. It's and have these professionals talk to each other. Was there an error in the previous when we hired the ed spec consultants? Did they make a mistake? What I guess I don't know. It seems like a very big discrepancy. And I don't know if we can get.
One would say a 20,000 square foot discrepancy. We're working to narrow the spread on Monday. That is the number one concern of ours, that we're working to narrow the spread as a unified team, architect and building committee, so that we can communicate that work to the board when it's complete.
And that's Monday, what time?
6:30 p.m.
Okay.
Till 9, got to stay up late if you want to keep up with this. Yeah.
It's
So
hybrid. I'm sorry. I said yes. It's hybrid, both in person and virtual. Yeah.
Cody and Karen have their hands up, as well as Ms. Downey.
I'm probably beating a dead horse here, but.
Oh, he's not done. I'm sorry, Dr. Mercanthony is not done.
Oh, sorry.
While I'm haranguing. The other, when we, I remember at the board meeting, when we hired the architect, I raised a caution around talking about things outside of the ed specs and educational gimmicks or things like that, not necessarily things that might not be necessarily rooted in educational research. And I just want to raise that caution again, because like I said, I get very concerned when I read about whisper rooms and pods and small group rooms that were not in our approved ed specs. And I just want to make sure, obviously, as Kathleen said, there was a lot of conversation about the ed specs and there was a lot of community engagement before we adopted them that went into the ed specs. So I worry about, and I'm concerned when we have additional conversations and get additional ideas that go into the ed specs after we've already approved them. And that is obviously a big concern.
Yeah, you make a great point. I would remind you though that the ed specs haven't been changed. We have very proactively said to SLAM because of their K through 12 architectural experience in Connecticut. They've been the architect for more K through 12 schools in our state than anyone. We have very proactively pursued with them. Give us your best thinking. Well, while you're at it, if you have any suggestions, let us know what they are. And if the building committee agrees with the suggestion, then we'll make a formal recommendation to the Board of Education. So that's what's coming. Yep. Point well taken, though. Absolutely.
So I will call Cody and then Karen.
Yeah, just my question was that square footage difference was so big that is this a matter of like someone making or maybe we don't have an answer to this, but is this a matter of someone making a mistake or some like, reasonable people can disagree or something? And if so, like, how is that? Maybe this isn't the right place to drill into this yet, but like, I think it's relevant for us when we think about who we rely, like when we hire an ed spec firm or an architecture firm in the future, like if it is a mistake, that's something we should be aware of. And I guess what does it take to figure out if why the square footage is so off?
I do think there are some competing ideologies around this particular issue of a net to gross square foot calculation. I think that's where we have traced this differential.
Yeah, I also think it's noteworthy to say that when we questioned SLAM about their proposed percentage of the building efficiency ratio, they showed us documentation of 6 additional middle schools where the building efficiency ratio was between 62 and 65% with an average of 64%. And I mean, the documentation is the documentation. When we've asked other professionals, can you give us one example of any school between 70 and 75%? We've gotten no answer, no reply back from that. So I think it's a great question from Cody as to, is it a mistake or whatever? We really don't know the answer to that. Except one, I share with you the information that I just shared, but secondly, we're going to do a very deep dive on this very topic on Monday, and SLAM is going to be prepared to show how the percentage is calculated, the drivers of the percentage, so that everyone can come away with a leveling, if you will, of understanding what is the right building efficiency percentage for this school.
What does CSG say when we say what's the? I know Laura said there's some competing theories, but like, what's the counter, or can they point to an example where a school had that ratio, or is there anything to substantiate why they gave us the numbers they did?
No.
Does that call into question having them hired as our owner's rep? Like, that would make me think that. Like
Kathleen has the calculation in front of her.
Yeah, I mean, this is in the memo. In the prior version, 33% was used in the 660 model, 35% was used in what was called the 660 hybrid. That accounts for the discrepancy in terms of the ratio, that circulation space between the two models in the last version. This is when we were going between the 660 flex and the 660 revised. The 35% was chosen to address the potential need for more room in common areas with an increase in student population to around 700. Remember, we went down from there. However, it was determined that 33% is sufficient to meet the needs of the population in both updated options. So we went through all this analysis, guys. We spent a lot of time out. I know we were tired through the summer, but I am going to send this information to the building committee and SLAM. This was a memo that Tom and Tony wrote, but this was based on all the information of CSG at the time. This, to me, I'm just going to say it, to me, you know, sometimes people come in and they, all of a sudden there's budget creep. Sometimes we all like to have things a little bit go up. We have different opinions. I was using the example the other day that an investment bank tells you one price, the other investment bank tells you the other price, and you go with the one that brings you to market at a little bit higher. So I think it's a little bit of that. I'm just going to say it, but and I am going to forward you this memo in case you
Yeah,
don't
please
have it.
do. I would assure you it is not that, which is why we're going to have SLAM defend their number Monday night. Yeah, eyes wide open.
Tony,
Well, color me extremely confused.
Oh, Karen has been waiting a long time. Karen Hirsch online.
Oh, thank you. I was just going to go back to the fact that, we did, like, Ms. Stowe said, have a very long discussion on multiple occasions. And there was one particular discussion that we had prior to voting. And I distinctly remember CSG discussing with us, there were multiple ways to look at circulation. And we had a discussion about that. I can go back and look at the specific dates. So it may just be that there's a difference in looking at that formula. And I would definitely like to hear more information as to how SLAM calculated their circulation space and other things. But I would leave that to the building committee at this point. And that's why I was just going to say, I know that a lot of things were suggested. I appreciate from Mr. Turner suggesting that they've asked SLAM to give some good ideas and suggestions, much like Dr. Mercanti Anthony. We didn't ask for whisper rooms. We didn't ask for additional things. So let's look at those, I think, at this point as a suggestion. And I will wait to hear from the building committee, who's been working their tails off on having these discussions and presentations. Nothing's been brought forward to us, but I know these weren't things we asked for, and it's not really within the architect's purview to change our ed specs without bringing it back to us. So I'm hoping that they will be working within the confines that we gave them, and I look forward to your meeting, hearing the results of your meeting and discussion on Monday.
Ms. Downey and then Ms. Kolsky.
Okay, I'm actually going to change gears back to what we were talking about the traffic and the cars. And just go back to what we were. Anyway, I guess Amy is probably the right person. Just kind of curious about, I wasn't able to participate, just the neighborhood response to these different concepts, which I assume were shared with them, and how a decision gets made once you have your traffic report. Just to give us some sense, because I think we have a lot of views that we were talking about. It's good to get the cars off, the advantage of a bus entrance. How do you make that decision, and how was the neighbor response to that?
So we were really happy to have about 68 questions sent in via a QR code that we shared that evening, and we have compiled the responses to all of those. A number of them were about the entrances and exits, and we've had separate conversations with some of the neighborhood groups who were also invited to our visioning session. Each of the neighborhood groups has a different interest, of course, you can imagine, depending upon what road their neighborhood is connected to. But again, we're going to use hard data to make those decisions, and we'll use the traffic study to do that after all of the traffic counts are in from all of the intersections, as well as the sight lines that will really also be taken into consideration with your staff in town, in DPW and planning and zoning and the arborist, because sometimes when you put in a new driveway, you need to take down some trees in order to provide the right sight lines. And we know that we want to be very sensitive to keeping privacy for the neighborhoods and keep as much of the existed wooded edge of the property as possible.
Also, I would add, Ms. Downey, and that is, we will be having our second community engagement forum in late April or early May to get further neighborhood and community comment about the very thing. Right. They've been very engaged. As Christina said, they not only did they come to the visioning meeting, which was now right after SLAM was hired in January, but they've been very proactive in their communications with us through our Gmail and also by attending the community engagement forum last week. So more of that's coming to keep them involved.
The actual chair has told me that the pretend chair is almost out of time. So,
Okay.
Dr. Mercanti Anthony, you have 1 minute.
I have a different point. I know in the documents, one of the things that is a possibility is the reduction in space of the proposed new auditorium. And I know no decisions have made yet. Obviously this room is a major community space and it's used a lot by a number of things, including obviously the RTM. I would suggest that it would be incredibly helpful to hear from the RTM. And when we're having these phases of the design phases, if that's something that if that's appropriate or not, in that if they don't speak up, I think there's a real possibility that space gets shrunk. If we're looking at spaces and things like that, and I think it would be incredibly helpful while we're having these conversations now, not when it comes time for their final approval, to hear from the membership of the RTM of whether or not they believe a large auditorium space as proposed in the current ed specs is valid and appropriate. Because otherwise, there's very real possibility that they're moving, and they need to know that.
Listen, if you weren't paying attention because you have a job on consolidation day, Ms. Tarkington said there better be adequate parking here so that she doesn't have to park at the church for the RTM meetings. So
I will give you a more
the
formal
BET
answer.
seems to be invested here.
I'll give you a more formal answer. You make a great point. The RTM does have a representative on the building committee. And also on the building committee are both current and former members of the RTM. So we are thinking that voice is there. And we'll hear those voices on Monday when we look at the list. Yeah, but you make a great point.
Do you want to give Cody another chance, Joe? Oh, okay. Cody, you may go ahead.
Hey, thanks. Sorry, I know this, I just want to come back to the point I was making before, because I'm not sure I got a fully, I understand what our approach is. It just strikes me as really bizarre that something that's basically a math question, like the square footage thing, could be so far off. And then it sounds like we've got a view from the committee that the architecture is definitely right. We have views on the board that maybe they're wrong. How are we going to reconcile this and figure out if we were misled on what the numbers are? It's obviously easier to correct if the architect has an error, but if the ed specs were an error, like in terms of the square footage calculation, do we have a definitive way to figure that out? Like to establish if we were given incorrect information? And if it is established that we were given incorrect information, do we plan to keep the firm that gave us that information employed on this project?
Well, you ask a lot of great questions. Maybe I can give you one blue sky answer, and that is if you would be patient with us and let us do our work Monday and Tuesday. As I said earlier, we're going to ask SLAM to defend their calculations down to two digits to the right of the decimal point on building efficiency. I think if you could let us do that work and then make our report to you on our findings, the answers to your other questions will most likely be obvious. And then, of course, it's a board decision as to where you go from there with that information. Maybe you'll have a recommendation back to us. But if we could do our work and come back to you with our report next week, I think that will shed much more light on the topic.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. But will you guys give CSG a chance to, I guess, be in the room and offer their case, or is that the right way to do that?
Well, CSG and Turner and Slam will all be at the table in this meeting. So absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
We'll be sitting tight then.
Can I have my superpowers back, please?
Happily.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony.
Yeah,
Really
absolutely.
great.
Thank you.
you.
Yeah.
Okay, I noticed the Monsignor out there yawning a little bit. So, and tomorrow is the high holy day for some of your flock. So I know you might have to get going. So I make a motion that we move item 10 D and E ahead to be next in line so we can address some of our audience participation here. Do I have a second for that?
I second.
Can we all in favor, please say aye, raise your hand. Online,
All right.
aye, and Karen?
No, we have administration that has to get to work tomorrow too, that is waiting to present for our action, so.
So you say no, thank you. Okay, so you lose. All right. We then move it ahead. So let's go with item 10D, the Hamilton Avenue Field Use Request. Motion is approve, oh, that's not the one. Let's see. Motion will be to authorize the chair of the Board of Education to execute the draft partnership agreement regarding the field use permit and the use of the parking garage at Hamilton Avenue School. Do I have a second? Michael, do the second. Okay. Discussion.
Shouldn't we let Blaze make the presentation? Because this is his item now.
Well, he is going to be, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Blaze, you there?
Oh, yes, I
Thank
am
you.
here. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay, yeah, so before you is a motion. This is a request that the Greenwich Public Schools received to use the Hamilton Avenue School field from the St. Roch's Church. They submitted a formal request to use Hamilton Avenue School field in the parking deck for their annual St. Roch's Feast. The dates that they are looking to use the field are 2023 through August 9th through August 12th. And they would like to have some access to the field beginning August 5th. So there's a draft motion. Their letter is included in their formal request to use the field. And before you is also a draft agreement for the board to kind of formalize what their decision may be on the field use permit. I believe we have the representatives of the church feast there to make their presentation. So this really is not, an issue of mine. This is a community issue being brought to the board. I'm facilitating that conversation right now because as part of the event permit process, as you know, the event for our property is typically handled by Parks and Recreation. This event will still be intended to be permitted by Parks and Recreation, but specifically the use of the field, which Parks and Recreation is not permitting, is why this is before the board today. So I believe that Mr. Capielli is there today, as well as Father McIntosh, who made the request, and I would like to hand it over to them. Does that sound good to you? Looks like it's good.
That's great. Paul, go ahead.
Chairman, thank you. Board, thank you. I think Father's request was pretty well detailed. If everyone had an opportunity to read it, we had addressed some things that we thought were important to, make this safer and better for the community. And I'm hoping that everyone agrees and allows us to use the property.
Okay, any questions? Christina?
I have a number of questions / comments. This is more going to be partially to Blaze, partially, procedurally, and I love procedure matters. First of all, one of the things says the Greenwich Public Schools will issue a permit for the use of the field. I don't think we have that authority because those are under Parks and Rec. Am I right or am I wrong? I don't, so that's kind of a question.
Would be wrong on that. I believe that last year we issued a permit. We issue permits for the parking decks. And we
I know for the parking deck, but I thought we had a whole discussion about the fields when we were talking about it at the budget committee the other day. Like, we don't permit the fields.
We do not typically permit anything on town property or school property. That is correct.
No, but
It's
I mean,
usually handled by Parks and Recreation.
right. So I don't think we can undertake that we're issuing a permit for the use of the fields if we don't. I don't know if we, these are just questions. I don't know.
Yeah,
if
So
we
maybe
really have that
permit's not the
authority.
right- permit may not be the right word too. That could be, that's a good point.
So this is another, these is, again, these are procedural things. Whether the proper signatory is the chair of the board or the superintendent, again, that's a question. I don't have the answer to it. One thing is, and colleagues may chime in once they hear my questions. It talks about the community will donate, it says another 12-month landscaping service agreement. I don't really remember a first one that was an annual one. So I'm not sure we were made aware of that previously. And then the issue of, well, I applaud the desire to give 15,000 to the Hamilton Avenue PTA. I think we have to take a look at our gift policy about what is appropriate, because then it becomes a gift that we have to accept, which then has to go to the RTM. It's just a little more complicated because it's not a gift from one of our partner organizations. Again, procedurally, I'm just, Ms. Kowalski, it's like tag you're it on the gift policy. And we'd had the conversations about donations generally the other day. And then the other thing would be, I know the letter commits to using a certain vendor. That's not memorialized in the agreement. So while I'm not necessarily against the concept, I think we only got these documents yesterday, and there's a lot of I have a lot of questions that I think need to be satisfied, which I'm not sure we can do this evening, Mr. Kelly. So that's just a reaction.
Thank you. Karen Hirsch has her hand up.
Thanks, Joe. And much like Ms. Downey, my concerns are mostly from another I can't even speak. I'm so sorry. From a process point of view, this is the first time we've seen this. We got these documents barely 24 hours ago. I know I have a lot of questions. We typically have a first read of things like this and have an opportunity to have input from the public on their opinion, the community that this serves. And so I think that putting this as an action item tonight may not be the right option, mostly because I think a bunch of us may have some specific questions. Much like Ms. Downey, I did want to point out a few things that I was concerned about. One of them was the mention specifically of a donation to the PTA. And I think that it's all wonderful and well to donate to the PTA, and I applaud St. Roch's for doing so. I think it'll be very appreciated by the PTA, but they are not part of the Greenwich Public Schools. It should not be part of our agreement. The PTAs have their own process for accepting donations. They're a separate entity. They have their own rules and requirements. I'm not sure how this would affect their gift cap, though I'm sure it probably won't put them over the limit, but I really think that that's not something that should be part of our agreement. I think it's an exceptionally generous offer from St. Roch's, being that it'll go back to the kids, but I don't think that that's something that is part of our decision-making. And much like Ms. Downey, I see that it notes offering another 12 months of landscaping services. I don't remember seeing that come before us as a gift prior to this. So I think that would be an additional gift request that we would need to consider. And I'd like to be able to sort of see what that entails. As I think we would need to approve a donation of those services, much like we'll have to approve the next agenda item at some point. So I think that's my bigger concern for everything else. My last question is for actually Dr. Jones. I know we're looking to fix the Hamilton Avenue parking structure, and I'm not entirely sure how long that would take, or when we think we might, or what time frame we're looking into that. I know that St. Rox has consistently utilized that parking structure over the years as part of this, the surface of, and I don't want to hold them up if that's part of this.
Blaise, I think you answered that better today than I did, actually, on the timing. You're just asking, like,
Yep, yeah, so the time frame, Dan was working on a assessment for an RFP. Should be done within the next 2 weeks, and the goal was to have the preliminary report hopefully by June.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen?
Hey, Joe. So I have a few questions too, but I have to tell you, and the fact that tomorrow, St. Patrick's Day, I'm marching in the parade in New York City tomorrow morning. So I'm on a very early train. And with the Knights. So I do have to say, I obviously care very much about this. However, I too feel like I'm just kind of getting up to speed, and I have a few other questions, like, is this coming every year? Are we memorializing this as a partnership or a policy? Are they becoming a partner, and therefore that becomes something around gifting? Like, there's lots of bigger picture things that we should be thinking about. And it's the first time we're seeing this. So in the interest of moving forward on the agenda, I kind of think we should maybe defer this to our next meeting, especially because thankfully for once, we're not like trying to do this in the summer. We have, a few months here before they have to rent the fields. So
I will make a comment first, and then we'll see if that's what everybody wants to do. My first comment is that my colleagues are not wrong. But I do have to apologize profusely that we are resisting, it's not my colleagues that are doing it, it's the procedures we have in place. When I joined the board, I put it as a high priority for me to make it easy for people to give money to our schools, to make sure that money goes to the children and betters our schools. So I apologize. If you go to a private school and you offer to donate money to them, they take you to dinner and buy you wine. All right. And they sit you down and pat you on the back and say, thank you. We put paperwork in front of you and scrutinize you and question you as you stand up here before us, trying to give us stuff to help the kids. So I apologize for that. The procedure has to be addressed. I feel I didn't do that as I wanted to do that 3 years ago when I joined the board. None of my colleagues are wrong. They are 100% correct in analyzing the procedure and needing to hear more information. So I'm not saying they're wrong, but I'm saying I think we have to address the system, and I think we have to say thank you, and I apologize for the system being difficult the way it is. Karen?
So I agree that the system is difficult. And so I'm going to say, I think you should, as your almighty powers as board chair, ask one of us, and I'll volunteer to help with the process, so that, because I think this is a very gracious offer that should not be denied, that would give the Hamilton Avenue School a wonderful upgrade and a wonderful field for kids to play on and for other uses. And I know that the festival is a huge hit in the community, was last year, and everybody was raving about all of the different carnival foods. Unfortunately, I missed it, so I'm going to try to get it this year. So in order to get this done and get this done right, because I think overall the sentiment of the board, as it was last year, is to let this go forward, but we got to take care of the protocols. I'm happy to work with Father and Mr. Capielli in order to get this done, so that when we can bring it to the board, we can do that and do some background issues as well.
Cody?
Joe.
Cody?
It's Blaise. I just wanted to before Cody, just for clarity, the donation that the church made is the checks were written out to the Hamilton Avenue PTA, and they are donated by them to the community. So just as a point of note, it's noted on that draft agreement as a point of note, but it doesn't need to be on that. I mean, that document is just a draft for the board to do whatever they want with. So I think it's a good conversation, but Paul, you can point out something otherwise, but the church dropped off the $15,000 checks for the Hamilton Avenue PTA, and those are being, given to the community regardless, directly to the PTA.
That covers that procedure. So good.
So I just want to cover that piece right there for you.
Great. Thank you. Cody, you had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think this one is an easy one. This event was a big success last year. It sounds like they're making improvements to it. Even if they didn't, I'd be in favor of it. But I think it's like so stereotypical of government agencies to say, oh, let's spend more time talking about it. Let's make sure the process is correct. But we know that this is, or I think some of us know that this was a successful event. I would not be in favor of delaying a vote on it. If it doesn't pass in a vote, we should definitely bring it up again later. But I think Blaze has done a great job getting this set up, and obviously is intimately familiar with Parks and Rec, and that's helpful. But you know, I feel like we already went through this once. This is getting ahead of it, which is nice, and I'd be very in favor of voting on this and having one less thing on our agenda to worry about in future meetings, because Lord knows just with Central, we've got a lot to talk about. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Cody. Karen? Hirsch?
Oh, I was just going to say, this is not a discussion or, you know, in my 10-cent opinion at this moment, just as to the use of the field. It is just really a question on process. And so it's not about saying yes or no. And they do have time. I think that, you know, last year we were under a great deal of pressure due to time. We greatly appreciate that this has come to us so early. But I know there probably not just myself, but have some other questions. Other members might have other questions on this. You know, that just we want to be able to make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's before we, you know, move forward, because there are a couple of questions. But and I will say thank you in advance on behalf of Hamilton Avenue PTA for already supporting their students there, and that I think that's great. So
thank you, Karen. And I'll
very generous.
conclude this with a suggestion. Sorry, I didn't see it, Michael. Sorry.
The only silver lining I see in a month delay is this idea that if we can figure out a way of memorializing this annual event in such a way that we do not have to have a annual approval of it, but something that some kind of longer term agreement, I think that would that I see as being helpful. But I do have a question. Because everybody says we've got plenty of time, but do you see, Paul, a month delay hurting you with the vendor negotiations that Monsignor references here?
I'm afraid of ever using the vendor that we've been forced to use for the last 8 or 9 years.
Right.
Unfortunately, we had such a small space that the more reputable vendors wouldn't consider us. So we do have consideration from a very reputable vendor. And unfortunately, like a lot of other things, COVID shut down a lot of these carnival companies. So there's very few choices. I want to give you folks whatever you need to make the proper decisions. I'm good at selling them. I hopefully can hang on to them. It's a consideration of mine. It is something that could be at risk in a minimal way, but that minimal way is super impactful. I don't know if that answers it correctly, but that's the truth.
Laura.
So because this is such an extenuating circumstance where this keeps coming back to us, and I'll ask the question because I think I know the answer. Did Parks and Rec say no already? And that's because the board is like the decider of last resort. So the implication is, does Parks and Rec say no to allowing the field use?
So I can answer that. The last year, what I learned from you folks in the meetings, you guys actually laid out how the approval of a field gets used. And I think permit, there was a question earlier, it was a good question, and the word permit may not be the right word. The Board of Ed has a scheduling thing on their computer, and it schedules the properties. So I think what we're doing here is looking to schedule the property, not permit. Parks and Rec would still have to permit it as it relates to the insurance and all the things that go along with it. But Parks and Rec ultimately doesn't get to decide who does and who does not use the school property. That's what was communicated from this board to me last year. And on top of that, it was, you guys had discussed and I was listening, so I wasn't part of it, but what I heard was the principal had the first right of refusal and because someone had asked, they were concerned why this came to the board and they were.
Yeah, we don't need to.
Yeah, they were talking about the
we
procedure. and it-
Decide this stuff.
It was supposed to be that the principal would decide, and if the principal either didn't want to decide or turned it down, then the entity would have the right to go to the superintendent. If the superintendent either turned it down or wanted to throw it to the board, then that's what would happen. I think out of an abundance of respect is why it's at the board. I think that's the best answer. I don't think we want to skip anyone. I think we want this input here, which is a very final resolution. I think that's why Blaze set it up that way. I just followed the instructions as to what process I should follow, and I followed it.
This is directly contradictory to what we learned last year. We were told we were the deciders of last resort because there was a discrepancy between Parks and Rec allowing use of the fields because Parks and Rec decides who and when uses them. We never, like, no baseball league has ever asked us about, when they could use our fields, no soccer, no football. This is something that Parks and Rec does exclusively because they have management over our outdoor facilities. So I love that you're checking with us, but I don't believe this is really our job unless there's already been a no.
I'll just help answer that question because I thought the same thing, also having worked over there. But for the field, the permit for this use will not be issued by Parks and Recreation.
So they said no.
Yes, I coordinated to find out what the process would be for the event permit process from Parks and Recreation. They will permit the event as normal as all events, walk it through the process with insurance, risk management, police, fire, everything like normal. But they are looking for the Board of Education to permit, by permit, I'm using the actual definition, to allow use of the field. And we already do parking decks, so that's part of a normal process. We do parking, lots, but they are looking for the Board of Education to allow use of the field. They are not permitting use of the field.
Thank you. Cody.
Then you're in the right place.
Sorry. Laura, you still going? All right, Cody, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna make the point that this is a great opportunity for us as unpaid citizen volunteers to do the right thing, whereas other people, if you're an employee who has to sign off on this, it's maybe a lot of downside potential that you may perceive with little upside. So I don't fault anyone for not, there's different incentives and constraints for different people, and I'm not faulting any of the folks in the various departments for not wanting to just have this on their plate. But for us, we're in a nice position where we can say this makes sense, this has a good track record of being successful, let's sign off on it and move on and stop talking about process and a bunch of things that really don't matter for what we know will be a successful event.
Karen Hirsch.
Oh, I was just going to ask, make the suggestion that we table the motion for the next meeting, and like we've done in the past, if we have a document where you can post, specific questions so that the same question's not asked over and over. That way, we won't have to spend as much time going through a lot of the nitty gritty at our next meeting, and we can be able to try to move forward in a more positive manner with this. And just to address one comment, we do have policies and procedures, and we have them for a reason. So, that's why those of us who are focused on some of that, do point that out. So it's not just about making it difficult. They're there for a reason, whether you like it, or not. But so,
Cody.
Yeah, I was just gonna say this is already a disproportionate amount of time that's spent not on student achievement or capital planning or things that actually matter for students. So
Strategic plan.
or strategic plan. Thanks, Mike. I would recommend. I always forget the rules. Can I make a motion to vote on this?
There's a motion on the floor. You can call the question, but before you do that, I'd like to say something.
Okay. Well, please.
I'm under the impression that this motion won't pass. I believe we have a strategy that we could put forward that will get this motion to pass. It'll bring all members of the board on board with this. We have to address a little bit of procedure. Karen Kowalski has agreed to work, as Dr. Jones pointed out, with staff to solve or tie up the loose ends. I believe we can get a commitment by all 8 board members if we just tie up some of the loose ends. So we might have to delay this. So I'm going to withdraw my motion.
Joe, can you help me with, does that mean I should make a motion?
You can make a motion if you like. Yes,
Can I make the same motion you just made?
you can. Yes. You have to say it. Let's see.
What's the text that I have to say?
Let's see.
A motion to approve the field use request?
The last motion I made was authorize the chair of the BOE to execute the draft partnership agreement regarding.
Okay, I got it.
All right.
I motion to authorize the chair of the BOE to execute the draft partnership agreement regarding the field use permit and use of the parking garage at Hammack School.
Before somebody seconds that motion, I'd like to ask a question. Can I do that? Okay, second it. Now can I ask a question?
Now you could speak
Okay,
to the issue,
if-
speak to the motion.
If the motion does not pass, will there be an opportunity to bring this before the board again?
We could always bring up, if a motion fails, it could be brought to the board again for a vote.
Well, if we table it, it can simply go on to for the next, we can ask at the agenda planning to put it back on for the next meeting.
Correct. So either way, it fail, or if we withdraw the motion again, then it still can be voted on next meeting.
And the motion, sorry, Cody, I wasn't listening to you. I was
It's
thinking
just,
about
I
something.
just read the text
What?
in the agenda, the action item.
Joe's motion, the motion.
It authorizes execution of the agreement in the current form.
So Cody, while I completely agree with you, and I would go ahead and vote yes, I don't think you're going to get it to pass tonight. And the question is, do we want to go through that process, or take the next month, let me work with the staff to get it in a point where we might convince some of our colleagues.
Well, we can
Hold on,
still try to
Michael.
convince-
Hold on,
Okay,
we might
let's
want to
go.
ask for some divine intervention here. What do you think? No, sorry, just kidding. Mike, go ahead.
I think we're discussing the motion. I think if we're considering the community conversation, I think it's a very different community conversation to convince the board to overturn a vote taken the month before that it is to reconsider a new vote for the first time at the April meeting, if you understand what I mean, Cody.
I understand exactly what you mean, and I agree that we should table it.
Somebody said divine intervention.
Yeah.
Perfect. Cody, are you interested in withdrawing your motion?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say that I'm really disappointed because this is a colossal waste of time relative to the other things this board should be working on.
I don't think anyone disagrees with you.
Well, if people did disagree, if people actually agreed with me on that, we would just vote and get this through because we know where this is going to end up anyways. It's just a waste of time, but we'll, do whatever we need to do to distract from the real issues.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on. Send questions. Okay,
Please.
send any questions to this topic to Tony. She'll answer them for you. And Christina, you've got a motion.
Because Joe asked me to do this one. Motion to accept the donation of an irrigation system as proposed in the donation form dated 1/13/2023, conditional upon a fully executed GPS purchasing contract, insurance as required by the town risk manager, a fully executed 15-year full service maintenance agreement, and all relevant town permits.
I second it.
Similar to the last one, Joe, because if I may, because you kind of told me I could.
Yes.
My question, I just have some questions about this. Again, we only got this last night and didn't, in terms of, I see there's a maintenance agreement involved, but we really haven't addressed things like increased water usage or electricity costs for the district to be paying in connection with the sprinkler system. So I just think a little more clarity would be, for me, would be helpful if we could get that provided to us again, because we didn't get these documents till last night and we don't have answers to some of these questions unless Blaze has answers up in the Zoom sphere.
I believe that I'm not sure if the donor is there or there's a representative there, but they were planning on coming to speak. So Joe, I may defer to you to see if Mr. Frank Cortese or his representative is in the room or if they left given the hour.
Frank's not here.
Okay.
Okay, then we'll put it off as the other one. Do you want to withdraw your motion?
Happily.
Thank you. Okay. Send questions to Dr. Jones, please. Now we are, let's see, where are we now? We are the
soil update.
new courses. That's it. New courses, linear algebra. Where's our motion for linear algebra? I move to approve addition of linear algebra as GHS as presented at the Jan 19, 2023 BOE meeting. Do I have a second?
I'd happily second that.
Okay, Karen, second. Okay, discussion?
Is anyone presenting or should we just start asking questions?
Okay, Andrew Byrne is online as well.
It looks like Karen has a question, so while I'm preparing mine, go ahead. I just took your paras back. Joe, go ahead.
We're asking questions of Ann and Mr. Byrne, right?
Yes.
Okay. So questions? Go ahead, Karen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
To be fair, I don't technically have a question. I was just going to make a statement. And I think it's important that people just know, you know, the reason I'm fully supporting this, of course, it's the mission of the Greenwich Public Schools to educate all of our students to the highest levels of academic achievement and enable them to reach and expand their potential. And I believe offering this course gives our students that opportunity, you know, to expand and grow. And I think it's just important to know, because I did ask some questions of Mr. Byrne as well as Mr. Mayo, because I just wanted to know. But you know, there's really no downside to offering the course, because if we add it to our course catalog, it doesn't mean necessarily the course will run, because Greenwich High School does require a minimum number of students to enroll in a course for it to run. So we offer plenty of courses that, due to low enrollment, are not always run every single year. And while we may not have enough students to run it in one particular year, another year or a year following, we might very well have that enough students to do that. And it gives them an opportunity to take a course like this from our excellent and incredible teachers, as opposed to taking something online, which doesn't show up on their transcripts in the same way, especially when they're students at that level are looking to make sure it's on their transcript when they're applying to colleges and things like that. So to me, I think this is sort of a no-brainer. It's been asked for many years, not necessarily linear algebra, but higher level math courses. I just don't see a downside to it.
Thank you, Karen. Kathleen?
So Andrew, thanks so much. I'm happy you brought this to us, but I do have a few questions. So Karen makes a good point. We typically don't run courses, right, when there's not a certain number of students. You, in this guide, suggest that we'd be buying at least something for 12 students. So is that in fact your minimum? And can you tell me sort of what the matriculation potential is looking like? I mean, I think that there's, in the 10th grade, I feel like there's 6, but I could be totally wrong about that. So could you tell me what the 11th grade is looking like and the 10th grade, and maybe what the next few years look like in terms of potential?
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Stowe. Obviously, I think the opportunity to offer linear algebra is an exciting one. And we heard earlier tonight from the students, and it's important to know that the department and the entire Greenwich High School faculty is behind it. So while we only have 8 students who would be eligible for potentially enrolling for next year, we do suspect that more students are in the pipeline, especially when we look back to some of our current 8th and 9th graders who have been accelerating or completing Honors Algebra 2, even in the 8th grade. So while I'm not expecting that we'll be able to get it up and running right away, but As Ms. Hirsch has mentioned, it is something that we're striving towards, and I think we will be in a better position in future years. Regarding class size, I would defer to Principal Mayo and Vice Principal Talata on what those thresholds are. I know that they try to maximize student opportunities across all our course catalog using the teachers that we have on staff.
Can I ask again another
Yeah.
question?
Good.
Yeah. So I know that a few years ago, for example, I remember we approved, was it honors advanced topics in computer science? It was the one class beyond AP computer science. So of similar, I guess, stature, I want to say. Has that had an opportunity to run just as a comparison?
Unfortunately, we have not been able to realize that course at this point in time. We certainly have heard, as you guys have heard, in the fall, our computer science program is blossoming, and we're really proud of the work that we're doing, especially in the 2 AP courses. But we just haven't been able to kind of get even more than 9 or 10 kids in the last several years to pursue that.
And so then what do? They kind of take the independent, is it also MIT freeware? Or is it the same concept that they then have to go that way? And how does that, to Karen Hirsch's point, how does that work on the transcript? Do colleges sort of appreciate that, recognize it? I'm trying to say, that's one of the things I've been hearing about this, the children taking honors linear algebra online, is that it's almost like it's not well explained to the colleges.
Yeah, I don't want to speak to the college impact, but I will say that, the fact that our faculty are so generous across the board, especially math and science, to provide these independent studies for our students is really a unique quality of Greenwich High School, and one that, our students are very fortunate to have. And I will say, in my interactions with colleges and students, certainly they applaud the students and their passion for wanting to, pursue these various topics at such a high level. And again, our teachers are there supporting them and encouraging them along the way.
Thank you. I could keep going, but it's not fair. So I'm going to, no, go ahead. Other people
Okay,
go.
well,
Thank
let
you very much.
Cody jump in. He's got his hand up there. Go ahead, Cody. Math topic for you.
Yeah, I think this class is great. I think I made this point last time, and it doesn't look like it's a hard requirement, but I would very much encourage you to offer this to good math students who don't want to take calculus, because you don't need, nothing on the unit schedule requires calculus. And I think it's really nice to have a alternative math path for, like, not everybody who likes math likes calculus, me included. But just, I think that's a way to fill out the class, because it, like, treating it as an alternative as opposed to, just another step, because it is totally a different type of math.
Yeah, Cody, your point is well made, and I certainly agree with you. I think one of the hesitations on our part is that we don't want to unintentionally decimate our wonderful ad calc program that we've been very successful with over the last number of years. So I do think moving forward, maybe that might be something that we would consider as a school and as a department to open up the access to a course like linear algebra.
Is it going to be a requirement to have calculus, or is that just intended?
As of right now, our current description in the course of study guide is that they would have completed advanced calculus. We're trying to fill that need inside our community for those students that exhaust all our courses. So, but like I said, we may want to come back to you again as we, do further studies in the future and have more conversations with our students.
Does the BOE have to vote on it if you change the course requirements, or once the course is approved, you can kind of do what you want?
Well, every year the course of study guide is brought ahead, and any changes are communicated by Dr. Ann Caraballo. And if something was significant, I would imagine that the board would want to weigh in on that discussion. Would that
hit the qualification for significant, or just like from a practical standpoint?
I don't think so personally, but I wouldn't want to speak for Dr. Caraballo. I see that she's on the phone, on the line here, but I think this is something that, as we explore and hear from our students, it could be an easy switch. And, not that as I said, I know from a math progression point of view that linear algebra doesn't necessarily have to follow ad calc, but, I want to make sure that we're not just accidentally, pushing our students into the wrong direction either. So I think a little bit more time and investigation would probably be helpful with this one.
Yeah, I would just say like, there's not the point is to expand choice, give people more options. It's not like why we would have more loyalty to advanced calculus over linear algebra. That doesn't make sense to me. It would just as well as it wouldn't make sense if you came and said you had to take linear algebra in order to take advanced calculus. So I would strongly encourage you, I'm not going to get in the way of this program, but I would strongly encourage you to not make that a requirement, because it just, like, you might as well make, taking some kind of literature class a requirement. It just doesn't have overlap.
Understood. I appreciate that. Thank you, Cody.
Thanks, Cody. Mike, you had something?
I know I voiced concerns last month, and I think some of the concerns were misconstrued. Is that I'm not necessarily against the high school offering linear algebra. I think it's a perfectly fine and an appropriate thing to do. I think, though, as I said, what gives me pause is that, and I think what we need to continue to consider is the pressure that whenever we expand our course offerings, that puts on all of our students and our whole student body. The last month, I think I mentioned Race to Nowhere. I got the title of the book wrong. The book is called Beyond Measure. The Race to Nowhere was the documentary based on the book. But the book's well worth reading. When it came out, there was a lot of conversation. Chris Winters was the headmaster at the time, and I remember him reading, he had the whole student committee around wellness and student pressures and things like that. And what concerned me last month and still concerns me is that when we talked about adding this course, there was no mention about some of those other factors and some of those other pressures that whenever we add a course or whenever we add a track, that kind of pressure is going to happen and it's going to be felt. I mean, just look at the conversations that we've been having about how, college opportunities and this and that, and all the kids, the 8th graders are hearing that. And they're all thinking, well, now I have to do this. And this is a course that very few, if any, of my understanding, is high schools in the country add. That's terrific that we have students that are able to do it. And I do not want to, I'm voting yes, because I want to limit choices for those students. But that also should give us pause, because we have a lot more students who are now going to feel pressure to do that, and how we're supporting students to make appropriate choices, to what Cody was saying, I think has to be an important factor in this. And it's a larger conversation than I think we as a board need to take up at a later point. At some point, I don't know when, I think some point around 1999, we seemed to think it was okay for high school kids to stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning doing homework. That's silly, right? So I think there are other things and there are other institutional pressures that we need to push back. And sometimes as an institution, it's our role to put those limits in place. So that's really just my concern here. But I don't want to shortchange the students, the small group of students who really, are capable and should have this opportunity.
Christina?
I 100% agree, Mike, that, once we create the pathway, students are going to feel compelled to follow that pathway through college pressures, peer pressures, what the like. So I would caution and urge the administration to really focus on when kids are doing these triple jumps as in middle school, to guide them appropriately. So that's perhaps maybe part of the transition in 8th grade, 9th grade that we should be thinking about a little bit more in terms of the math path. Andrew, I know we had a conversation about this just in terms of, so you're assuring us that it'll only run with the same number of students as any other course would run at the high school in the math department, like this computer science class, correct?
That's correct.
And just in terms of, we're talking about a course that we are not necessarily even sure is going to get developed or be needed next year. In terms of your allocation of staff time and resources to developing a curriculum for it, could you just kind of speak about that and just the amount of time that's going to be involved in that, and obviously if there's an accompanying cost?
Yeah, a lot of work was already done to put the proposal together. We have a couple of people that have worked on it along with me. And so, I imagine if we are fortunate enough to have the board approve it tonight, as I outlined in the proposal, we would spend some time this spring and summer fleshing out the actual course syllabus in greater detail, so that we have it for the future. Obviously, we want to make sure that we have those front-facing and backward-facing curriculum documents. I don't imagine that it would be very costly, maybe a couple of days of growth and development, as far as bringing maybe 2 or 3 teachers together. So I do think the cost would be under $1,000 if I had to put a number on it.
Okay, thank you. And just, I know Cody has his point about allowing more students, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that you really have to be cautious before doing things that are going to dilute the value of your ad calc class, which is an exceptionally good class. It's extremely helpful for any student who wants to study math in college, even if it's not an AP class, in terms of the preparation, what it allows them to place out of, or even to take a course in college that they've already taken in high school to ease their college, first semester college burden. Thank you.
In the interest of trying to bring this to a vote, Karen, can we make a brief comment? Then Cody will follow quickly.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I was just going to say one of the things that I had asked Mr. Byrne ahead of time, and I thought maybe might be helpful, is the number of students that do take ad calc and are signed up, currently and signed up for next year. Knowing the number of students there are in every grade, it's a small percentage. I'll let him answer it. I don't see that it's going to drive students that really are not truly focused on this higher level of math to stress themselves out that they have to get to this level. I think this is for a very specifically a minded student. It's been asked for years for higher level math to be taught within our schools. So I don't know if you want to mention how many students are currently signed up for ad calc.
Yeah, right now we were only able to run one section for the current school year. So we have just under 30 students for ad calc presently, but it looks like next year we're trending in the same direction that we have for the last couple of years, and we should have approximately 40 to 45 students who would sit through ad calc next year.
Okay, Cody.
Just real quick on Mike's concern about kids feeling the pressure to do this. If you don't have ad calc as a requirement, it goes from being a linear step, no pun intended, to an alternative, and I think it can actually reduce the pressure. It's an easier class, I think, than ad calc. So having taken a year of linear algebra, I think you can end up in a better situation than the current tracking, because if you create a lot of choices, it reduces the pressure to go down a particular path.
Thanks, Cody. I'm going to try to wrap this up. I was at the Lions Club breakfast on Saturday morning, and Barbara O'Neill approached me, and she insisted that we approve this course. Otherwise, I was feeling I was going to get detention. So I'm going to call the question. All in favor of approving this course, please raise your hand. I believe that's unanimous, 8-0. Thank you. Thank you for checking now. Okay, now we're going to go with the graduation date. I move we approve the June 15th, 2023 as a date for Greenwich High School graduation. Dr. Jones?
Hopefully this will be the fastest item of the night.
Somebody has to
Let's make our
second it.
seniors happy, their families happy. And just as a reminder, the law did change just a few years ago, so that when you set the graduation date, even if we do have a storm or something that comes up, we do not have to change graduation. So this will be set in stone.
Or if Michael secretly seconded it. I know you're asking for that, but he was secretly seconded. Yeah. Okay.
Actually, I think Kathleen seconded for you. Okay. I have a couple of questions. I know this should be an easy one. I have a couple of questions. So the first question I have, and it goes also into our next motion that we're going to have regarding the last day of school. So let me start with that. So I know that we don't take Juneteenth off, and we are going into it, and the last day of school is then going to be Juneteenth for some, and it is a state and federal holiday. And I did some checking, and the school districts that are still in school take that day off as opposed to days that not. So therefore, I raised the issue that we are one of the very few districts that are in school that I couldn't find any district that was in school on that day that didn't take this day off. So I raised that as concern one, and what message does that send to our African-American community that we are not taking Juneteenth? Also, because it is a federal and state holiday, it becomes a 3-day weekend. And you are having graduation on a Thursday night when people might want to get out of town early for a 3-day weekend. And you have the graduation party that takes late on a Thursday, and people can't get out of town because they can't get out early enough. And therefore I raise concerns that perhaps graduation date, which isn't necessarily tied, as far as I could tell, to the end of school, plus most seniors aren't coming to school anyway because they all have their internships. If it makes sense to move the graduation date up a few days so we don't run into a Juneteenth 3-day weekend problem. And yeah, that's my issue.
So I would say on Juneteenth, different districts are handling it differently, just like Veterans Day. I mean, I think you'll find like we're actually in school on Veterans Day. So I think we look at it where if we're going to be in school, we'll make sure that we have programming so that we're educating our students about what that day actually is.
That's actually part of the requirement that Governor Lamont put into law, that if you're going to be in, that you have to have an educational program. And if that's the case, I think that becomes part of the curriculum, which would then need to become that the board would have to look at as well. But that's a separate issue. But my other point is, I know Stamford is off on Juneteenth. I know Bridgeport is off on Juneteenth, the other major cities and districts in the state. So I just raised that as an issue. Maybe we don't want to change it here, fine, but I would ask that we take a hard look at this if we're going to continue to be on school on June 19th as to what this says to a greater population, that we're not taking that day off when others do. And also presents, like I said earlier, I think may have an issue of 3-day weekend issues for certain people who have it off, and teachers whose students may be off in different districts.
Thank you. I'd like to call the question. Oh, we have another comment.
Just,
Christina?
well, I guess this kind of goes to the point. It kind of depends on if we move it or not, because we are supposed to have our June Board of Ed meeting on June 15th. So we would have to set a new night for our June Board of Ed meeting if we move it. Well, we're double booked.
Related
It would be a school function that, if we can't be at graduation and here at Central Middle School at the same time. I know, and that's why I'm answering sarcastically.
Yes, Tony, one more thing, Dr. Jones.
So just keep in mind that while it's incredibly difficult, we are supposed to, with integrity, set graduation as close to the last day of school, even for seniors. So we do have to be cognizant that you move it back to Tuesday, we're supposed to get the seniors back in school for the rest of the week. And I just want to share that because that's not going to happen. And that's right. And so I share that. We would be tabling this until next month, because I would have to go back, check with Karen Foster, check with Ralph, make sure it's not conflicting with something else. That our high school graduation, as you know, is enormous. Takes a tremendous amount of booking. They have to make sure things are available and, the rentals.
Christina, you want to make a final comment?
Yeah, just because in past years, we've done it as a first read and then we finally vote in April on the graduation date. So I guess the question is, can we follow that old practice given this other information about Juneteenth? I guess that's just my question in terms of you were about to call the question. So that was my response to your calling the question.
Well, I'll tell you, I have a senior who's graduating. And boy, oh boy, is this date very popular amongst the graduating seniors. They were so celebratory that this was the date. So I would not even want to delay this vote, because it seems like we would have an uprising in the graduating community if we did.
I was just more concerned about all these ancillary things. That I don't care when graduation is, because I don't have a senior, other than we show up.
Thank you for your concern. So I'd like to call the question. All in favor? Cody, well, so that's.
I'm in favor.
Okay, so.
As am I.
All against? Abstentions? One abstention. Two abstentions. Two abstentions. Okay. So that's 6-0-2. That passes.
I love when the votes go with non-political groupings.
Christina, could you read the next motion? Yeah. Thank you.
Motion to approve June 16th as the last day of school for 6th and 9th grade students and June 19th as the last day of for all other grades. Do I have to read it, Tony? The last day of school action is dependent upon no additional days off, and if so, the calendar will be extended one day for each day that schools are closed.
I will
second that.
second down. Laura hasn't seconded anything, so you get to be the seconder. Fantastic. Discussion, Michael?
I have to say, I do have some agita around, being in school on June 19th. And I hear about programming. I wonder how extensive the programming can be if it's also the last day of school, in all honesty, awards assemblies and things like that.
I think to me, it reminds me of Veterans Day, having been in districts where we're in school and when we're out, the vast majority of our students will get nothing unless the school addresses it. And in that, what I see when I watch our Veterans Day across the district, I know a lot of you have attended them. They are phenomenal. And I trust our staff would make it a meaningful day.
Christina?
And Mike, just historically, since I'm older than you are, I don't want to say that in the numbers, but there was a big outcry back in the day when we started going to school on Veterans Day and Columbus Day, particularly Veterans Day. So, and it was about appropriate responses and activities. And to Dr. Jones's point, I think it's worked out very well.
That's fine. I think look, this is a new holiday and maybe it's something that evolves. I don't think we would win the argument that we could stay in school on Martin Luther King Day and do educational programming. So I think moving forward after this year, I think it's something we need to think about, in all honesty.
Okay. With no more comments, I will call the question. All in favor, raise your hand. And that's 7 in favor, all against, 1 against. That's 7-1-0. That motion passes. Okay, now it's time for a discussion item. We have the Western Middle School soil update. Dr. Jones?
I think this one's going to be fairly quick. We're excited about where we are. Dan, do you want to come forward and share the information that you shared today? No, come on. We're making such great progress. I actually got my name on the permit sheet today. They were working on sending that to Hartford to Deep, so we're really excited.
So we recently received what we're considering some favorable news from the regulators associated with the Western Middle School field. The latest discussions with Connecticut DEP have provided information that suggests a limitation to the site-wide mass excavation of 2 feet. So if you remember, the whole plan of the remediation was to remove 2 feet of soil in mass across the entire field, ship it out, and bring back new fill. The recent change in that is that the regulators are going to allow us to just strip away the topsoil, which is, let's just say 6 inches for an average, and remove that from the site. That's going to save us a significant amount of time and effort. It doesn't mean we're changing any of the risk profile. It just means that we're approaching the project similar to what's going on at the high school. The change in the plan could provide relief to the project by lessening truck traffic, decreasing estimated cubic yards of contaminated fill to be disposed, reducing the amount of fill brought to the site, and most importantly, should cut down the schedule as to when the fields will be reopened to the public, which is the big news. Also of significant importance is that the team associated with the project continues to have positive discussions and feedback from meetings with Town of Greenwich agencies, as well as representatives from the neighboring bakery. We've met with the tree warden to discuss planting and tree removal options. We've met with Parks and Rec to discuss ancillary equipment needed, meaning goals, flags for field alignment, the actual way the fields are laid out. We've met with the First Selectman's Advisory Committee for People with Disabilities to discuss routes, accessible routes to and from the field. We've met with the school administration to discuss access to the fields during construction. We've met with the bakery plant manager to discuss access to the site via the bakery-owned driveway, and the GPS security department to discuss additional site lighting along the walkway that runs the entire length of the field. So all in all, the project is moving forward. I think we're in good shape. I don't want to throw any dates or dollars at you tonight, but it's just an update that things are looking good.
Dan, that's good news. Thank you for that.
Sure.
Of course, I'll offer my help, but I know you'll say no, go away as usual. So, but I will help if you need me to do anything.
Go away.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions of Dan? Okay, thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. Okay, next action items are all Blaze. The special education out of district interim request, motion to approve the interim funding request as presented. Blaze?
Do we have a second, Joe?
Point of order, should we actually put the dollar amount in the motion?
I just read it off.
I know, but that's my question. It's a question. Mike Atanasio, are you out there? Like,
I can't answer that.
Well, let's go what we have. And we'll
Okay.
get a second and we'll see how that,
okay.
I'll happily second it.
thank you.
Well, I won't say
Okay,
happily, but I'll second it.
Blaze, go ahead.
Hi, so we've got a number of items here to discuss. The first interim is the interim. This was the one for special ed, you just said, Joe, right?
Correct.
Okay, so I got a lot of my interims here today. So basically as you know, so the special ed in my financial report, we are currently between the total out of district tuition program and the special education settlement line. The net of that is currently a negative of $1,015,373 for legally obligated special education expenses. We're currently carrying this cost. As the board knows, the special education excess cost sharing grant, which helps supports this program, is state revenue. That program goes directly to the town, that revenue. We can't access that revenue. So the way to access it is through an interim. Through Dr. H's work, we are receiving actually significantly more, even significantly more than budgeted. So that we only had budgeted 900,000. We're on track this year to be between 1.4 and 1.6 million. Last year also, just for reference, 900,000 was budgeted for the program. We had a big deficit, but the Board of Ed absorbed that whole thing. But the town general fund had been reimbursed again, 1.3 million in that excess cost program. So I will let Dr. H, who is here, kind of articulate a little bit more background on the actual expenses and how the program's running. I will say that we are already absorbing a number of costs. And in addition to this, the district we have a large negative in substitutes. We've got a large negative in electricity already, in facilities overtime, we're in the red. So it's not like we have areas of cash that we are flush with that we can use to cover these legally obligated special education expenses. Dr. H, I think you might want to add some insight onto the actual program budget status.
Sure. So when we met a month ago, maybe a month and a half, at our executive session, we kind of talked about some of the costs that have come, that have come through the department. There is just in perspective, when I started a year and a half ago, the budget for this fiscal year was being presented within starting just a few months. And it kind of took us last year to get everything settled. And then we had a few high cost students that got added to that. So it's not that we are mismanaging the money or we're, having a large number of students. A lot of this is finally getting to a balance where we know exactly what students we have, how much this costs, and trying to even it out. And as Blaise said, we've been able to bring in through the excess cost really what some of that deficit is, but the money goes directly to the town. And so asking for that back to be able to help cover the cost of the revenue that it's actually generated from.
Yeah, great. This is a problem kind of specific to Greenwich with the way that the revenue is structured, specifically this revenue program. And so it's just a process. I reached out to the town to see if we could receipt the excess revenue directly back to the program over the 900,000. Town finance is not interested in doing it that way. They want us to follow the normal interim pathway approach. And so here we are.
Thank you. Karen.
Just so I can understand this. So we're asking for an interim of a little over $1 million, but we're saying that the SPED excess cost sharing grant that we get, we think is estimated to be somewhere between 1.3 and 1.6 million. And that amount of money goes to the general revenue fund for that, the town general fund. So they're getting that money. So what we're asking them is really just to pay us back $1 million of what we've already collected through your hard work in the excess cost sharing grant. Do I have that right?
You have that mostly right, except for the fact though that the town, I think logic would be on this piece that they budgeted 900,000 for that revenue against an expense model. So in the mill rate, in theory, they were building the budget expecting 900,000 in revenue. And so it's the excess over the 900,000 is how some people would view it. But yes, the town general fund is being reimbursed 1.3 to 1.6 million. And we are essentially asking for those funds to go back to the program to help cover the deficit, which is how it would typically be arranged in almost every district in Connecticut.
Understood. Thanks.
Nobody else? Okay. Without further seeing no more questions, I will call the question. All in favor, please raise your hand. That appears to be unanimous, 8-0. Thank you. I like 8 zeros.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. H, Blaise, you're still in the hot seat. We have the Havermeyer Building flood interim. Motion to approve the interim funding request as presented for Havermeyer Building response and repair. Do I have a second? Oh, Laura's going to second that. Thank you, Laura. That's awful nice of you.
Great,
Okay,
thank
Blaise,
you.
you're up.
So, yeah, so this is an interim funding request that we are seeking to submit for $545,000. The background is that most of you are aware, but on February 4th, we had a pipe burst in the upper floor of the Havermeyer Building. 2 offices on the upper floor The boardroom, as you're all unfortunately well aware, and the entire print shop were severely damaged. Those damaged areas all contained hazardous materials, including asbestos and lead paint. So the areas had to be abated. And like the boardroom was completely gutted to back down to the studs on all sides of the boardroom. In that room, we had all the Board of Ed's tech equipment for what we're doing right now was in there. All the furniture was lost and contaminated, and then the print shop furniture was lost. So there's two interims related to the for simplicity, there's two interims related to the Havemeyer flood. One is for the rebuilding of the building and the furniture, which is a very straightforward one, especially with insurance. The second one is the print shop, which we'll talk about in a minute, but that's specific to the actual print shop equipment because most of the print shop equipment was lost. So for this first one, we're talking 545. It's broken down on the attached document, but we're coordinating closely. Dan's team has been great. They responded immediately, and since then, they've got up and running. The town's risk manager, Megan D'Amato, we are working very close with. The insurance adjuster has been out. For this interim, the town, for this, we were advised, originally we thought there was a deductible of $250,000. Megan reached out to Dan, Tony, and I to notify us that for this incident, it was going to be a $100,000 deductible. So the way that the insurance funding works, which most of us are unfortunately well aware of, is that it goes to the town's fund, and the town, similar to the last conversation we just had, has us come for the funding. And so this is the funding mechanism to access the necessary repairs. Dan's budget is currently carrying this. We're carrying this as a district, this entire repair so far. So this is a bit time sensitive. We got to get it over there to get the insurance reimbursement. And the reason that these were with the finance committee on Tuesday, when we talked about these with the finance, with the BOE finance committee, is because the RTM does not hear any items other than budget in May. So we have to also get it to them by the April meeting. So that's the background. If there's questions about the specific repair, I think Dan's still there, but
Well, I heard you say something nice about Dan. He's gone, so you don't have to keep doing that. And so.
Oh, good. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. So what you're saying is this money we're asking for the town will be reimbursed to us by the insurance company, less $100,000. Is that what you said?
Yep. That's what should happen.
Thank you. Any questions? I see no questions. So let's
One
take.
question.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Karen.
Blaze, what is the timeline for getting reimbursed by the insurance company? And do we anticipate any haggles by the insurance company with respect to the amount and what they will be willing to reimburse?
Great questions. I'm not 100% sure on the timeline. I will find that out. That's why the town has it this way, so that we can access the funds right away, and then they'll get reimbursed directly. The town will actually get reimbursed directly by the insurance company. One of the reasons that the building one is separate is, or we have a high confidence of full reimbursement. We're working really closely with Megan. When we talk about the print shop equipment, that one's a little less straightforward, and I think there's a little more of a gray area on that one. This one, we're fairly confident. Everything is pretty straightforward with the insurance and with Megan and everybody on the actual building damage.
Okay, and the other question I have then, and maybe this goes to the other one, but is it 100,000 for, like, would they be, sorry, it's getting late.
It's one incident.
That was my question. It's one incident. So even though these are two separate approval for motions in respect to the financial piece, will only be out technically, if everything goes as planned, 100,000, and the insurance company would pay 442,000 in one and then whatever the other one is, but it's looked at as one incident and we would only be 100,000 for both of these to combine.
Yes, one incident, one insurance claim, two different interims because of the nature of the two different interim, the way the town funds them, but one incident, one property claim.
Any more questions? Seeing none, I would like to say, I'd like to take a vote. All in favor, raise your hand. That looks like one of those unanimous votes. How cool is that? 8-0. Thank you very much. Next one is the print shop interim funding request. Motion to approve the interim funding request as presented for the Havermeyer Building flood print shop equipment. Do I have a second? I'm going to go with Laura again. Thank you, Laura. Okay. Any questions? Oh, I'm sorry, Blaze, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I'll present this one quickly. It's a little more complicated. We talked about it at the Finance Committee on Tuesday, a little bit more in length. But essentially the thought process behind submitting the interim is that the timing of the end of the fiscal year and the fact that the RTM doesn't hear anything in May is why it's before you right now for discussion. The equipment all in to basically rebuild the print shop is $234,650. The difference on that interim request right now, which is partially unknown, is also the fact that the print shop lost all paper, all ink, everything in the print shop was lost. We're currently, as of this week, so Jonathan Sopranowitz, who oversees the print shop team, we set up a approach where the print shop staff is currently working, but we have an outsourced vendor actually doing the printing right now in Stamford for a very low cost. This has been a lot to try to get a print shop back up and running so that we still have the function going. That is operating out of Stamford. We'll see how it goes. It just started yesterday. So that's exciting news, but this interim is before you. I could see, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, thanks, Blaze. I do have a quick question. If we do get the interim from the town and the insurance company pays us, do we have to give it back to the town? I'm just kidding. Any real questions? Karen, oh, there you are. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, I just have one quick question because I know that the print shop is utilized by ourselves as well as the town. It's a shared resource. So I just was wondering, I mean, is it specifically covered under our insurance? Is that why we're requesting the full amount of funds needed to replace, or is this something that's a shared expense with the town?
It is the town's insurance, other way around, town's insurance and fully budgeted by the Board of Education. It's in our budget, which is why we're the ones that have to ask for the interim. And we actually eat all the excess costs. It's a separate point. We could talk about it. Well,
that's a discussion for another day. It's a shared.
Too late for that. Yeah, too late. Too late. Yeah.
Well, we're only focused on putting what we have back. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Hey, Blaze. Oh, wait, sorry, I went out of order.
Good, Cody.
If we like the current temporary setup we have for this print shop that we're using, does that mean that we potentially don't need this? Or like if we approve this, does that mean that we're for sure rebuilding the print shop, or is there a chance still that we may want to go fully outsourced?
Hey, Blaze, you want me to jump in there for a second? We're having conversations and I'll hand it over to Dr. Jones about doing some analytics on that, Cody. Very good question. So we're going to decide within this short period of time now that we're outsourcing the printing. It's certainly not a growing business. We hope it's not a growing business, printing. So I don't think we want to be in the printing business. So, and Dr. Jones agrees. So we're going to do some analytics on just that point.
So how does that impact us from a voting standpoint?
I think that you could withdraw the motion and you could do what the BET does, which is condition the interim upon execution of the interim funding upon a analysis of the outsourcing cost, something like that.
I would be in favor of that approach.
Well, Blaze, tell me this, and I agree with Cody. If we claim the insurance claim and we get the payment, do we have to take that money and put it back into the printing equipment?
Well, remember, all the insurance money goes back to the town. So that would be another piece of it. What I asked Megan, and I do not have an answer yet, is if that question exactly. If we do not rebuild the print shop, does the town still get reimbursed for all the lost equipment? And I do not have an answer to that yet from Megan, but I did ask that question because I think it's a good question.
Well, it depends on the policy, but yes, sometimes you have to discount. If you take the money rather than the rebuild on a home, you get a discount to not rebuild the home. So it all depends on the policy. But now, do we think, are you advising us to approve this motion and take action on the other things we're talking about and get answers there? Or should we hold the motion till we get the answers?
I may let Dr. Jones weigh in. I think from just my initial reaction, it would be to maybe approve it with the conditions that we discussed so that we could still move forward if needed on it, presenting back to you. But also, I think you could do it either way.
I'll go to Christina.
I think it's better to approve it with the conditions just because of the RTM timing, because if the analytics show that we really want to replace the equipment and we don't get it on the RTM call for April, now we're waiting till June.
Do you want me to withdraw my motion? You reframe it in a different way and then move forward on that?
I guess, well, do we want to put the conditions on or do we want to let the BET put the conditions on it? Because that's the other alternative is we just vote on it and we communicate with them that if you want, because by the time it gets to them and gets to the RTM, we will have probably performed. I don't know how quickly, Tony, you guys would do the analytics. We may have the data, so we may not necessarily have to worry about phrasing how to do the condition in the spur of the moment. Your call, Joe.
Well, I would say we move forward with the motion and these conversations are going on, so we know we could change the flow of cash if need be. With the understanding that we're going to continue these discussions, I say I'll call the question and have a vote. All in favor? Cody?
I'm not in favor.
Okay. All against? One against, abstention? No. Karen, did you not vote? Oh, sorry, I missed it. It's getting late. I do apologize. So what number do we have there? Thank you.
And thank you. That was the logic for doing the interim separately so that we, if needed, could ask for one of those to be conditioned and put into a separate fund from the other work.
Thank you. Now we have two discussion items for Blaze. The financial staffing report.
Yeah, so the financial report, it's really late, so I won't repeat the whole report, and I did get that one posted on time. So I'll basically just say the main, on most of the finance, the main concern right now is the special education budget, which is putting pressure on everything else. We've received some relief from the penalties that were negotiated by Dr. Carabillo and Elmer, who for all of the debacle that went on back with the bus company in September through October and November, those penalties are going to be close to almost $1 million that they've negotiated to help pay for both all of the extra costs we had to pay for, and also will be providing us some budgetary relief. That is how we are able to help absorb the additional electric cost. And as well as we have the ARP funding this year to help with the substitute budget, as well as the facilities overtime. So otherwise, we're relatively on track, contingent upon that interim for special ed you just approved. Revenue continues to be a little bit strong. The food service lunch fund had our financial meeting with the food service team. Free lunch, it was resumed as of March 1st back. So we have free lunch again for the remainder of the year. Those meals are being reimbursed, I think, at $4.15 again per meal. And so that should provide us with both a great program for our community and a healthy fund balance for the school lunch fund. I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? Blaze, just a quick one, the one I always ask, we have this funding or this federal money that we've received, state money, whatever money you want to call it. We assigned that money to something, or there's some still outstanding. Can you please, we talked about it a little bit earlier. Can you just readdress that? We're not going to be giving any money back.
Dr. Jones and I are working hard with the cabinet to get every grant dollar spent.
What's unspent at this point or unassigned? Ballpark?
Primarily the unassigned, well, the unspent pieces. We have a large portion of these grants that are salaries. So the salaries are carrying every month. So that's the largest piece of why you see the balance for the grants that are going to expire.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, well, we're not putting it to a vote. So, okay, great. That is us good with Blaze. Thank you, Blaze. Oh, we have the transfer, sorry. Budget transfer, Blaze?
Yeah, so no actional transfers, just informational budget transfers. They're on there. Most of them are are within major object code 100s to 100s. You can see that they were primarily 3 of the 4 transfers were being used to fund the contract or services from Focused on Learning. And then the 4th one is an informational transfer from special education, just to pay for legal services for attorney fees.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you, Blaze.
Thank you.
Agenda planning. Karen, did you say there was something you'd like to put on the agenda? Did you mention something during the week?
I have a couple of things that I'd like to take up to put on the agenda. The first is by next meeting on April 20th, we should be in a position from the policy committee to have first reads on a host of policies that we'll be getting to you. So I want to make sure that gets on. Also, I wanted to get an update on our plan for racial imbalance. I know that at our last meeting, the last meeting with the state, I believe they asked for a plan to be put into place. I'd like to understand where we're at with that putting forward. What's our timeline? When will information get to the board about looking at that? So I think that needs to be addressed. The other thing, and I've said it before, I know generally what the reaction is going to be, I think, in regards to this, but I do think for proper process and procedure, since we've been talking a lot about that today, the superintendent's goals were never voted on by the board. We've done that in the past, and I do think it is important to continue that. We haven't done it. I realize on June 1st, we have her evaluation. However, I do think that we need to continue with the practice that we've always done. So I would ask that those be in for an action item on April 3rd, on our April meeting. And I do think we need to talk about moving now our June 15th meeting and coming up with a new date for that, which I would just suggest bumping it down a week and not moving it up, because we would be having, that just doesn't work. We would be having 2 meetings back to back on weeks. So I think I would suggest we move it to the following Thursday.
Okay, so anything else we want to add to the agenda? We
Well,
want
I
to
think,
discuss something being added to the agenda.
well, the 2 items on the Ham Ave field and the sprinklers.
That's right.
Need to
Good.
get put on in April. Vis-a-vis our board meeting in June, my suggestion would be rather than moving it by a week, I'd move it by a day to just earlier that week. Just because I think kids get out of school and, that's kind of prime vacation time for people. And I think, ideally, if we keep it in the same week, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday, if we don't want to do back-to-back nights. That's a suggestion.
The reading waiver.
Yeah, that was requested.
Oh, on it for agenda planning.
Yeah, it didn't show.
Reading waiver. Okay. Michael.
I had hope that Hope Springs Eternal, that the strategic plan committee will be in place to bring the board goal stock back next month.
Laura.
So the vice chair of the CMS Building Committee likes to stay up late and watch meetings and wants me to let the board know that the CMS municipal improvement needs to be addressed in late April or early May. So we may want to put that on the agenda for our future meetings.
Is that just as simple as what we did for Old Greenwich? Just authorizing to move forward?
My guess is yes, because there have been so many meetings at the town level between P and Z, DPW, all those SLAM, CSG, all of those parties have been at the table for weeks now on the MI issue.
Okay, anything else to add to the this now very crowded agenda? Yes, Karen.
I also have a question whether or not we can put it on as an agenda item. And this goes to the point, and maybe there's a different way to address it, but given that Mr. Boland has resigned as of the end of June, I think it would be beneficial to get an update. I know that there was a report done by the administration, or an investigation done by the administration. I think it would be beneficial if we could get some update on that.
Boland update.
Is that appropriate for executive session?
Well, it's the findings, right? So there was particular findings that were done that I thought that, forgive me, it's late, I'm forgetting the name, No. We did, thank you, that Dr. Budd had done in connection with his investigation that I thought had been completed, but we were waiting to determine, one, the status of Mr. Boland's employment, as well as the other state investigations that were going on. And it would be helpful to get an understanding of what Dr. Budd had concluded in his report.
Okay. Anything else before Laura makes her motion?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that. Thank you, Laura. We're adjourned. Oh, sorry. All in favor of adjourning, please put your hand up. Thank you. That's unanimous, of course.